It was after midnight. After tossing and turning in bed for hours, I finally got up to get some water. The lights were still on in the living room. Yes, it was that night. My brother Casey had sent Paul over to stay with me for a while. When I heard what had happened to him, it broke my heart. His wife had cheated on him, and his life had been turned upside down. Paul, who had been married to the same woman for years, had been blindsided in the worst way. Casey's son was also going through a difficult time. He couldn't cope either. "Jessica, please take him in," Casey had begged me. "He needs some rest." I didn't really know Paul, but I knew the reason he was in such a bad place was because of a woman's betrayal. We'd already suffered so much loss in our family. I mean, I'd lost my husband Jacob 7 years ago. I was 60, and he died suddenly of a heart attack. One minute we were building our dream house. It was supposed to be finished in a year. And the next, everything just stopped. Jacob's death turned my whole life upside down. I was left alone, and for years I've carried that emptiness inside me. But lately, the loneliness, it's hit harder. Tonight was one of those nights. Are you ready? Because this isn't just any story. This is about lines blurred, emotions spiraling out of control, and the silent screams of a confession waiting to surface. Every moment of it could spark something deep inside you. Feelings you didn't even know were there, pushing boundaries you didn't think existed. If this is the kind of story you've been waiting to hear, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world to me. I slowly made my way to the living room. A few steps inside, I saw Paul sitting there, watching a romantic film on TV. At that moment, the only thing on my mind was making sure Paul found some peace and quiet during his stay here. But little did I know that life had other plans. A lot of things were already going wrong, and it would only take one step, just one, to change everything. Paul turned to me and asked, "Did I wake you?" His voice had that mixture of uncertainty and a desperate need for some kind of peace. I was standing there in my nightdress, but honestly, it didn't matter. I'd never felt more alone than I did at that moment. "No," I said, giving him a gentle smile. "I just came to get some water." The truth was that I felt so alone at that moment that I didn't want it to end. Maybe spending some time with Paul would make the night less empty. Maybe watching a film together would make me feel like something in my life was still normal, like peace was still possible. "Come sit down, let's watch it together," Paul said, gesturing to the empty seat on the couch next to him. It wasn't a difficult decision. I wanted to spend the night with at least a little warmth, a little meaning, so I sat down beside him. The film started, but I couldn't really concentrate on the scenes. There was something inside me, something I couldn't quite figure out. Paul's presence, the way this stranger was sitting right next to me, the slight nervousness in his voice, it all felt so different. During the romantic scenes in the film, I found myself looking away from the screen for a moment. The couple on the screen coming closer reminded me of things I thought I'd forgotten. And then I accidentally turned my head slightly and brushed against Paul's arm. I quickly pulled away. "Sorry," I blurted out, my eyes darting away in panic. "I didn't mean to." Paul was silent for a second, then gave a small nod and said, "It's all right. Don't worry about it." But in that moment, the space between us somehow felt smaller. The film continued to play, but nothing felt the same. Neither Paul nor I could find any real peace in that moment. Even though we were sitting so close, it felt like the emptiness inside each of us kept getting in the way. I'd remember that night as the beginning of something more complicated than I could have imagined. That moment was like a signal that everything was about to change. The night had taken a strange turn. Sitting on the couch watching a romantic film with Paul, I couldn't help but feel attracted to him. Even though I was in my nightgown, sitting so close to another man after being alone for so long, there was this tension building up that I couldn't ignore. Paul's presence wasn't comforting. It made me realize things. Maybe it was because I'd been alone for years, but to be so close to another man again, it stirred something in me. It was confusing and strange, and I couldn't figure it out, but I definitely felt something for Paul. That night, it all became clear. I didn't relax for a second until the film was over. When it was over, I got up, went to my room, and sat on my bed for a while. I needed to think, but about what? I had no idea. Sleeping with all these feelings swirling around me wasn't like hitting the reset button. I tossed and turned all night. The lack of sleep dragged me into the morning. As the new day began, I decided to sit down at the piano, hoping to shake off the unease inside me. I'd been alone for almost 7 years now, and every morning, I just wanted to feel like things were still somehow normal. The piano felt like an old friend, one that brought me some peace and reminded me of Jacob. As my fingers danced over the keys, I hoped that this morning would bring me some relief. Then I heard a noise outside. A shadow appeared outside the window. It was Paul, out for an early morning walk around town. At first, I didn't even notice him, but as the melody filled the air, he opened the front door and came in. I continued to play, unaware that he was there, until suddenly I saw him standing quietly, watching me. My fingers froze for a second, and that tension inside me. Yes, it came rushing back, stronger than ever. But Paul just smiled at me, as if nothing in the world was out of place. "That was beautiful," he said. "Thank you," I replied. "Honestly, it's the best birthday present I've ever had." For a moment, I felt a surge of excitement. When Paul walked in, it was as if the room had shifted, as if we'd stepped into a completely different space. And then he said something in a calm, sincere tone that I'd never heard before. "What I've just said is true. Watching you for even a few minutes was the best thing I've experienced in a long time. And, did you know? I turned 40 today." It didn't take long for me to realize how much those words had stirred something in me. I looked away, trying to reconcile the swirling emotions with the sweetness of his compliment. Right then, for the first time in years, I didn't feel so alone, and I could feel that something was beginning to change. After the excitement of that morning, I found myself looking forward to that evening, when I found out it was Paul's 40th birthday. I wanted to do something, anything, to make the day feel normal, even special. An idea struck me, and I turned to him. "Is it your birthday today?" I asked. "Well then, let's celebrate. How about we have some wine tonight and cut a cake?" Paul gave me this surprised smile. "Well, if you're suggesting it, I think tonight might actually be fun," he said, with that playful twinkle in his eye. Then, after a brief pause, he added with a teasing grin, "But there's a catch. You'll have to play the piano for me again. No getting out of it." I laughed, trying to shake off some of the nervousness that was building up inside me. "All right," I said, "but only if we open a good bottle of wine and have a proper toast." Even that little exchange left a deeper impression on me than I cared to admit. I could feel the emotions bubbling up, but I pushed them aside, telling myself that this was just about making things feel normal for one night. It was just a birthday, a little celebration, that's all. But then Paul said something so casual and yet so startling that it threw me off balance. He looked at me with that same innocent expression and asked, "How old are you?" "What, 45?" I froze for a second. I'd always tried to feel younger than my age, but hearing such an honest compliment took me by surprise. I couldn't help but smile. "Oh, not quite," I said, brushing it off, but it was hard to hide the small spark of excitement his words gave me. Inside, I felt pulled in two directions, lost between the warmth he was showing me and the storm of emotions I was trying to keep at bay. When evening came, Paul and I had opened our wine and settled down to celebrate. As we talked, we grew closer. His warmth, the way he paid attention, it made me feel at ease. There was something between us, an attraction, something that grew stronger with each passing moment. Inside, a voice kept telling me to treat this like a normal, ordinary night. But then Paul raised his glass, smiled at me, and asked playfully, but with those vivid eyes of his, "So, when are you going to play something for me? You know you can't get out of it." I hesitated for a moment. Then I took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's do it." I sat down at the piano and let the melody flow again, hoping it would calm the storm inside me. But with each note, I felt something shift, as if I was being drawn closer to him. Even as I got lost in the music, I somehow found comfort in the way he listened, the way he appreciated it, as if it were the most important thing in the world. What I thought would be a simple celebration turned into something else entirely. In that moment, it felt like a glimpse of something I hadn't felt in so long. Something real. My vision blurred as my fingers glided over the keys. Each note stirred something in me, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. Paul's voice echoed faintly in my head, and it felt as if my heart and head were slowly drifting apart. I was so lost that I didn't even know when to stop. My hands were instinctively searching for another tune when Paul suddenly appeared beside me. He placed his hands gently over mine. "You're an amazing woman," he said, his voice soft and a little shaky. "And you play the piano so beautifully." His words echoed in my head, leaving a strange emptiness. His warm hands over mine had a way of grounding me, even as my emotions spiraled deeper. "Come on, you're tired," he said softly, his tone calm and reassuring. "Let's sit on the couch for a while. I've got a surprise for you." With a gentle touch, Paul led me to the couch. I still couldn't quite process what was happening, but something about the moment felt incredibly profound. As I sat down, my thoughts were still swirling. Then Paul returned to the piano. I watched as his hands moved effortlessly over the keys, and suddenly he began to play my favorite tune. I recognized it immediately. It was the song I'd loved for years, the one that always stirred something deep inside me. As he played, my heart raced. Every note brought back memories I wasn't ready to face. I just sat and listened, the music filling the room and igniting something inside me. After a while, I couldn't just sit there. The melody he played, it pulled me up, almost as if it was calling me. Slowly, I walked towards him, trying to calm the chaos in my chest. As I got closer, standing right next to him, I didn't know what to do. "You're really good at this," I said, my voice shaking as I tried to hide how fast my heart was beating. "And you're playing my favorite song." My words hung in the air, echoing around the room as my emotions clashed within me. "Who are you, Paul?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're you're really getting to me. I've never felt this way before." I I was completely overwhelmed, confused, excited, scared, and happy all at the same time. Our eyes met, and we were so close that I could feel his breath. When I looked into his eyes, it felt like I was falling into another world. And just like that, time stopped. The way he looked at me made my heart race and warmed me. At that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Everything made sense in a different way. In that moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. Everything else faded away, and suddenly, everything made sense in a completely different way. My eyes locked with his, and for a split second, nothing else mattered. All the confusion, fear, and racing thoughts just disappeared, leaving only Paul and me. His hands rested lightly on my waist, firm enough to keep me grounded, but gentle enough not to push. My head was spinning, and I couldn't tell if it was the wine or the emotions that were rushing through me without Paul holding me steady. I wasn't sure if I would still be standing. The look in his eyes made me feel even closer to him, and in that moment, his warmth and the sense of safety I felt beside him gave me balance in the midst of all the chaos. "You need to rest," he said quietly, guiding me to the couch. His words were reassuring, and the feel of his hands on my waist both comforted and unsettled me. When I sat down, his hands remained there for a moment, and our eyes locked again. I did not know what to say or how to feel. The warmth of his touch made that night unforgettable, powerful in a way I couldn't quite explain. That night on the couch turned into one of the most exciting, unforgettable nights of my life. Everything happened so fast that I barely had time to process it all before morning came. When I opened my eyes, I got up and walked into the living room. The smell of coffee wafted in from the kitchen, jolting me out of my half-asleep state. And there he was, Paul, standing in the kitchen, shirtless, making coffee. His body, still warm and strong from the night before, was on full display. And me? Well, thinking back to last night sent this strange feeling through my whole body. My nightgown and underwear were still scattered on the floor. Just the memory of it made me feel nervous and excited at the same time. The replay of the night in my mind only made me feel more confused. What was going to happen now? How could I even begin to find out? But one thing was clear. There was a connection between us that I'd never felt before. That night, that moment, felt like the beginning of something that could change my life forever. Paul turned from the kitchen and looked at me, his eyes soft, his smile warm. There was this silence between us, thick with unspoken words. As I stood there watching him, I tried to figure out what was happening, what I was feeling. Everything was such a mess. I had no idea what to do next, how to move forward. It was like I was lost in the moment, completely caught up. But at the same time, I could feel something shifting, and I knew there was no stopping it. Standing there as Jessica, all I could feel was this mixture of excitement and confusion swirling through me. I hadn't been able to make sense of anything since last night. Everything had happened so quickly. My clothes were still on the floor, and when I looked at them, I closed my eyes for a second and shook my head slightly. Everything was so complicated. I couldn't tell what I was thinking, let alone what I was feeling. I got up quickly and made my way to the bathroom. I needed a shower. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the whirlwind of emotions I was drowning in. My nightgown and underwear stayed where they were. I didn't care about the mess. All I wanted was to lose myself in the stream of hot water, to escape the chaos, if only for a little while. After a while, I stepped out of the shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and suddenly the door opened. Paul was standing there. I froze for a moment. Neither of us moved. Our eyes met and held, locked in a gaze so intense it felt like the world had stopped spinning. I didn't know what to do. The confusion and emotion in my eyes must have been obvious, for I felt completely exposed, vulnerable. And yet somehow I couldn't stop the words from rising to the surface and spilling out. "I don't even know what's going on," I said, my voice shaking a little. "What we're doing, I know it's so wrong, but it feels like I'm dreaming." Paul took another step towards me. His eyes were filled with so many conflicting emotions. None of us knew what was going to happen. I wanted to say something at that moment, but the words just didn't come. "Your coffee's ready," Paul said, his voice a little shaky. As my eyes drifted to him, I realized how chaotic and yet strangely beautiful everything was. I wasn't thinking about the future. I was just living in this moment. As I sat down with my coffee, the confusion in my heart was still swirling. Sitting with Paul, our eyes locked, remembering what had happened between us. It had all happened so quickly, I could hardly keep up. What had we done? What had we felt? I wanted to say something to make sense of it all, but finding the right words felt impossible. "Jessica," Paul began, his voice strained. "What we did was so wrong. I know that. Why did we let this happen?" There was guilt in his eyes, but there was also understanding. He knew, as I did, that things had got out of control. We should regret this, shouldn't we? We should never have done it. There was a pause. My thoughts were jumbled, but I finally found my voice. "Yes, maybe." It all happened so fast. But no, it wasn't right. We let things get too complicated, and now, looking back, it just feels like none of it makes sense. "It was a mistake for both of us," I said. There was a weight on my chest, but also a strange relief in admitting that we'd both gone too far. Paul was silent for a moment, staring at the floor. Then he looked up at me. "Let's pretend this never happened, Jessica," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I think for both our sakes, we need to put this behind us. What good could come from dragging this out, especially when things are already such a mess? We need space from each other. When he said that, something inside me resonated. He was right. Continuing this would only hurt both of us. Yes, I said, taking a deep breath. Maybe this is for the best. If you leave, maybe that's the solution. It's probably the healthiest choice for both of us. Paul nodded, his expression set. I have to do this, he said. It's the right thing to do for both of us. We sat in silence for a few seconds, just looking at each other. It was then that we both realized how important this decision was, accepting that what we had done, those dark moments, were just a mistake. Facing that truth could be the first step to making things right. Instead of dragging each other down in such a tangled way, giving each other space felt like the only way forward. I hope you have enjoyed my story. It's been such an exciting journey, and sharing it with you has made me really happy. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when a new episode is released. Also, your likes and comments mean the world to me. Hearing your thoughts and feelings really keeps me motivated. Your support helps me so much to create more. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next story.